Welcome back to Copenhagen Blue. Maybe you've experienced it, maybe you haven't, but sometimes if you've ever been driving and it feels like maybe your car's pulling or it's not accelerating or you let off the gas and it's slowing down faster than it should, you might have a sticking or a seized caliper. An easy way to test for that is if you ever smell maybe a burning smell or you experience those issues, when you get done driving, feel your wheel. If one wheel's hotter than the other, chances are that brake might be grabbing and dragging a little bit, creating excess heat. Another option you can do is you can always grab one of these little thermal guns here and you just point it at your wheel and it'll tell you what the temperature is. So if there's a big difference between one side to the other, well, then you know you've got a problem. Today what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace my right front caliper because it's been periodically sticking, and I'm also going to check my rear caliper because I need to bleed the brakes, but one of my bleeder screws is jammed, and I mean it's like rusted in there and I don't think I'm going to be able to get it out without breaking it. So I have a new caliper if I need to put it on in the right rear, and I definitely have a new caliper I'm putting it on in the right front, along with hoses on the left and right side, because sometimes those hoses can tend to swell up and it restricts the brake fluid, so it might be able to go in but it can't come back out. So let's get started and see what happens. I have the right rear wheel off, and what we're looking at here is mainly we're looking at the bleeder screw. Let me take you over to the bleeder screw real quick. So you can see it's protected by a little cover, but it's pretty corroded. And when I take off this plastic collar here, you can see that the threads are pretty crusty. We don't have probably a really good chance, but I have soaked it with some penetrating oil and we've let it sit for a few days. I'm going to go grab the specific wrench that you want to use on this, and let's see if we have any luck breaking it free. Now I can't get my flare nut wrench in there, so I do have a 10mm socket on here that's a deep well, and I can already feel that I think it's going to slip because it just feels like it. But I'm going to put a little pressure and see if it breaks free. Oh, it certainly doesn't feel like it wants to. So let's put a little heat to it and see what we can do. Give her a little tug here and see what happens. No, I don't think that helped it at all. I think all we have is just a rounding off. We're just rounding that off, unfortunately. So it's probably going to be the easiest thing is just to replace this one. Since I already have that caliper, I think that's what we're going to end up doing. The next step, since we're going to have to replace the calipers, we need to see if this bolt will come free from the actual caliper from the line. Alright, on this particular car, it's a 15mm. And what we're going to do is just see first off if we can break that free. Whoop, and that broke free pretty easily. Okay, so we know we could get the caliper off. We just have to undo the caliper bracket bolts, and we should be able to take pretty much everything apart fairly easily. And a little smaller for the caliper bolts, but we're going to take everything apart, get it out of the way, and put the new caliper on here. Alright, well, I cracked open the Banjo, or the bolt that holds on the Banjo fitting, and we're going to take that all the way off now. I'm going to wear rubber gloves because you don't want to get brake fluid on your skin, but this is also going to introduce air into the system. So at this point, we've now compromised our whole braking system and we have to bleed the brakes. Easy thing to do as long as all the bleeder screws open. I know that all of them open on all the other calipers besides this one. I have tried and tried on this one for a while. So let's get this caliper off and get the new one installed. To start, we're going to break free the bolts for the actual caliper. Those are 14mm on this car. You have to hold this piece sometimes. See how this is spinning? See how this is spinning at the same time? If you don't hold on to that, it's just going to spin. So you have to hold it or use an open-ended wrench to grab onto it, or vice grips or something, but you don't want to tear this boot. And then make sure you save your caliper bolts. We're going to be replacing them, so we have new bolts, but if you are just doing brake work, make sure you hold on to them. You might get quite a bit of fluid coming out when you do this. Oh, that's a lot of nasty fluid coming out of there. But now we can, even without taking that off, you can do a brake job without doing that. But we're going to take our caliper here, and wiggle, 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 get it off. And in this case here, we also have our parking brake cable that's attached here. So it looks like we're probably going to have to release this on our end here to get that cable off. So holding this with the nut, or with the wrench, I'm trying to get this off. I'm not gonna lie, it's not exactly easy, because I need more cable, and the cable shouldn't be retracting as much as it is, but it's really, really rigid. Oh, I think we almost have it. Haha! Alright. So now we can take this off. Aha. Ow. Ow. Okay. And pull that out. Ta-da. Alright. Awesome. Now we're going to take off the caliper bracket. We're going to take our pads. We're going to set those to the side. Alright, let's take these off. Alright, caliper bracket off. We don't have any issues with anything here. Gives you a chance though to check your hub. Make sure everything's smooth. Which ours is nice and quiet. Here's our new rear caliper assembly. You can see the caliper is already attached. We have a new bleeder screw here. And we're going to reuse our original bolts for the caliper mounting hardware. Let's start with putting the caliper bracket back on. We're going to feed this through and hook in our parking brake cable. And then we only have to come back a little bit with that in order to get that to hopefully lock in. Let's bolt this back up just like we unbolted it. 13mm? Yep. Alright. We're just going to undo, or at least we're just going to try and undo just the bottom. Let's see. It doesn't seem like it wants us to be able to do that. So we're just going to undo both bolts then. Okay. Okay, so we have our pads reinstalled. We're going to pull out this little purple plug here. Let's see. We have our new Banjo bolt. We're going to put our crush gasket on one side. We've got our hose here. We'll put our Banjo bolt through. Put our other crush gasket on the other side. And then we can thread that in to the caliper. Just do that by hand until it gets tight. So that's an 11mm on this car for the new caliper. So you gotta remember, we switched over. It's supposed to be remanufactured, but I go and tighten this down until it stops. And then we're going to go a little bit further because we crush down that copper gasket. And then once we crush it, we're going to back it off a little bit. Then we're going to re-torque it. And we'll get the torque spec on that as well. But what we did is we crushed the gasket down a little bit. That way all that tension wasn't just in the crushing of the gasket. It's actually, we torque it down after we've squished the gasket. Just essentially put a little dab on the end of the threads there, and then we're just going to thread it right back in. We're going to torque that down to 26 foot-pounds. So I'm going to do the bottom one as well, and then we'll torque it down. Alright, so we have 26 foot-pounds. There we go. We've got the click, click.
Alright, I couldn't find torque specs for that, so we just went by pretty much tight, plus about a quarter turn, maybe about a half, just to snug everything down nicely. We're going to make sure that our bleeder screw here is free, and then we're going to go do the other caliper. Alright, so the front caliper is a little bit easier. Definitely not as involved because you don't have the parking brake, but we still do have caliper bolts, caliper bracket bolts, and then we have, in this case, I'm going to replace the hose because these hoses can get really hard and kind of like an artery. They choke down, and then you press the brake and it doesn't want to let the fluid go back because the hose is constricted. So we're going to replace the hose. I'm going to show you how to do that, and we're going to do the caliper. First thing you want to do is get some type of catch basin. So this caliper bracket bolt here is held on by a 21mm on this car, and it's got about 125 foot-pounds of torque if it's torqued down to spec, so it's going to be quite hard to get off. So I'm going to use a bigger ratchet, 3/4 inch, and we're going to put that on there. And I've got one with a little bit of extra leverage, so I'm going to swing that out. We're going to pull that, and there it goes. There we go. So got that broken free. I'm going to do the same thing to the bottom one down here. Use my body weight though, push down. There we go. We're going to take off the caliper bolts. On here they're a 13mm. Now the reason I'm replacing this caliper is this one's sticking, and it could be the hose. This swells up here sometimes in the bracket, it squeezes down on it, or it could just be the hose itself. Could be getting hard. A 15mm here for the brake hose, the Banjo bolt. That came undone really easily, and you can see as soon as I break it free, fluid starts leaking out. Undo that, and I'm going to let that fluid fall down into the bucket that I have. I'm going to save the bolt. We're going to let a bunch of that fluid pour out of there. We're going to collect that. There's a bracket here that supports the brake line with a little support clip. That's a 13mm. We're going to take that one off as well. We're going to just pretty much make it easy to take everything apart, except for where it connects up top with the main line, which is not a flexible line. So there's a little clip here we have to get undone. And I found a real easy way is needle nose pliers. You can actually get in there. There's a little lip, and you just kind of pry against the fitting itself for a little bit of leverage. And that's what that clip looks like. It's just a little U-shaped clip. It kind of goes in there and it holds the hose in a channel. Now while it's in there and being held by this bracket, we're going to use our flare nut wrench, which goes over that fitting, or excuse me, over that line, and allows us to get to the fitting. We're actually going to break that free. There we go. And then we just have to keep doing that until we get it all the way out. But be gentle, don't force it too much, because if you twist that hard line, you're going to be really unhappy. So just kind of take your time with this. You don't force it along to do anything that it doesn't want to. There we go. Okay, so now I've got it. The hard line is undone. It looks like it's actually almost dripping clear fluid at this point. This will just have to use a little bit of finagling here. We're going to tap that. Just go, got that out, and we just set that hose to the side. So we have our brand new line. I'm going to actually fit it up in here and go through the hole, but I'm not going to really set it down in there for good yet. Just going to start to screw it in a little bit so that it seats. I'm not completely sure just how the hose is going to kind of kink yet. So what I mean by that is we have to twist the line around to how we need it. In this case, we're going to bring the line around like this, and that little tab there, that little tab goes into a hole, which is then one of these bolts goes back in to hold it down. So we'll put that in loosely. Okay, and then we have the ABS sensor here that has another tab that goes up there. That's held in by another bolt. So now once we get those two secured, you can see what I'm talking about when I talk about the direction of our hose. I'm going to bring this bucket back over to catch fluid. But you want to make sure there's no kinks or twists in the line. If it's twisted, that's a bad thing to do to a brake line. So we want to keep everything nice and straight. I'm going to put my little clip that holds things together back in. You can use a hammer to just gently tap that back in and it'll snap back in place. And then now we can use our 12mm wrench here, pipe flare wrench, and tighten this down. Go till it seats, and then we're just going to snug it up a little bit. You don't reef it down. It's a pressure fitting for the most part, but you have to have it till it's tightened all the way down. It's not just it's getting a little stiff. Nope, go till it stops, and give it a little love. See, right there, I think it's kind of bottomed out at this point. Let's see if we can, okay, so I'm going to give it just a little bit of a turn, and that's it. I'm just a little quarter turn there, tighten that down. Now we have our Banjo bolt that came out. We're going to put one copper washer on, and then we're going to put it through the fitting for our new hose. We're going to put our other copper washer on the other side, and then in this case we're going to wait a moment because we're putting on a different caliper. Alright, so we have our bolts out for our caliper. We're going to kind of wiggle this, pull it off, get our caliper out of the way, and then I'm going to take off the rest of the 18mm bolts here. We're going to also, while we're at it, we're going to set our pads to the side. And we'll take our caliper bracket off as well. Now our new caliper came not loaded, which you can get loaded and unloaded calipers, but it did come with hardware and actually 2 crush washers, which I'll be able to hold on to, which is kind of cool. I'm going to put these little guides on for the pads, and then we're going to put the caliper bracket back on and see if we can't flip the caliper up to put the pads in. I was able to load the pads into the caliper on the bracket itself, so we're going to see if we can kind of just put the whole thing on and start ratcheting. Now I'm going to just tighten these right now, but we're actually going to torque them down to their torque spec, which I believe is 125 foot-pounds. And since we didn't undo the caliper bolts themselves, we don't have to tighten those down. They're already there, or they're okay. It came as a caliper assembly, so cool. Trying to do this quickly because my hands are getting covered in brake fluid. I don't like it. There we go. So we're good there. That's tightened down. Shouldn't let any more fluid out. Now all we have to do is torque those down. We have to bleed our brakes. Well, here we are at the bleeding stage. Now, there's a certain sequence that you're supposed to follow when you bleed the brakes on a car. Usually it's the wheel furthest away from the master cylinder. In this case, the car is specified that I start at the left rear wheel and then I work my way around to the right counterclockwise. So that's what I'm going to do, but always consult your manual before you do anything like that. Grab a Haynes, Chilton, check your library. Sometimes they have a research page and you can get into an auto A to Z on there. Library cards are free, people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a vacuum bleeder and I'm going to hook it up to compressed air and suck out all the bad brake fluid until I start to get nice clear fluid. I have a bottle up on the reservoir and it actually is inverted. It's going to feed fresh fluid to the brake fluid system, and then it's going to keep going until it's clear. Time lapse. No, time warp. Time warp. Alright, so in the end, the car stops. We replaced our sticking right front caliper, and we replaced the right rear caliper because of that bleeder screw that was seized up from rust. So, definitely something you can do in your driveway if you have the tools and you have the knowledge. Opening up your braking system is a little bit different than doing pads and rotors, so please make sure that you're careful if you decide to tackle this job. But I appreciate you taking the time to watch. Hit like, hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time.